Well, the mold for the Haven is nearly complete. There's nothing like a deadline to get you motivated. I'm happy to announce that I am going to be exhibiting this boat at the Wooden Boat Show in Mystic, Connecticut. The Wooden Boat Show is June 28th to the 30th, and it's out on the Mystic Seaport. And I will be exhibiting in Tent A and booths 4 and 5. So if you're in the area, I hope you stop by and say hello. In the meantime, let me show you how I got these Ribbands on the boat. My name is Bob Emser. I'm a sculptor and a boat builder. My sculptures have always been inspired by nautical and aeronautical imagery. In fact, sometimes people passing by my studio would ask if I'm building a boat. I've always enjoyed the artistry of wooden boats. It seems like I've been building boats for over 40 years, and now I'm building sculptures that float. Welcome to the art of boat building. Well, we're getting ready to put the Ribbands on the molds today. The first thing I did was I went through and put some braces throughout every mold. And I did this by cutting these 45 degree 2x2s and then leveling it up with my level to make sure that they're perfectly vertical. After I got that done, I then began positioning the stem. Now the plans say that from the face of mold 2 out, it needs to be 20 5/8 of an inch, and in line with the beginning of the rabbet. So once that was established, and knowing what the bevel for station 2 is, and I got that from the plans, there's a chart there that shows what each bevel angle should be. So I took my bevel gauge and marked that, and then came over to station 2 and marked it, and then I just cleaned off that tip of there with a rasp. So now you can see that the stem fits very well there. I took a little bit off of mold number 4 also, as it needs to be in line with the with that station mark. So our next step is to start preparing the Ribbands. And in order to do that, I needed to have at least 16-foot long Ribbands. So I'm going to need to take those strips of plywood that I had talked about in the last episode, and I'm going to need to make a scarf joint. So the first thing we needed to do was to make a jig. In order to cut some uniform scarf joints, I put together just a simple jig here for the miter saw. Essentially, this would be against the fence, and we're looking for an 8-to-1 ratio on the scarf joint. So since we're using 1/2 inch material, then we'll take half of that, which would be 4 inches by the 1/2 inch. So what we'll do is take this and put it on the saw. It goes over here, so we'll line it up with the 0, and then get a couple of spring clamps to hold it on there. And we'll get a piece of stock to test it. We want to run this past the end of it. Put a clamp on there to hold it tight against the fence, and we'll give it a try. It's a pretty decent scarf cut. All right, so now we'll go over to the table saw, and we'll start ripping out our 1 1/4 inch Ribbands of the sheet of plywood. The sheet of plywood that I purchased is cabinet grade, and it's 1/2 inch thick, and it's clear of any voids. It also has, I believe it's 9 layers of laminate in it, so it should be very good, strong, and durable for our project. So let's get ripping. I've got my sawhorses set up here so that it will stay nice and level. So what we'll need to do here is put a little glue on here and clamp it. All right, so we'll get little carpenter's glue on here. Need very much. In doing this, what I'm really interested in doing is lining up the laminates. So, and we'll get a clamp. All right, and I'm gonna, nice and straight, looks good. All right, we'll let that cure for several hours, and then we'll take it off and put a spring clamp on it, and then do another one. Before we can put the rib bands on, we need to prepare the transom to be placed on the jig. So the first thing we did was I gave the back side of it 3 coats of a marine varnish, and then I installed the stern knee, which I found the center line first, and then I attached it with 3 brass screws. So we'll see how this fits on the jig. All right, so we're going to need to adjust frame number 22, because you can see here it is not laying against the transom jig, which is the proper angle. It also, you can see the stern knee is way too high on frame number 20. So we'll need to adjust that. So I think what we'll do is figure out where it will hit it at, and we make a mark on each side, and then we'll trim that off. That looks pretty good. We'll check the bevel here. I had earlier set the bevel gauge off of the plans, and we are right on the money. And now we know that we have the proper bevel of the stern knee. So the next step is to start lining off the molds so that we can start adding some rib bands. All right, so the first thing we want to do is to establish the shear line. So this line, the shear strake will go below this line, and the broad strake will go above the line. So this is a known entity off of the plans, so we're going to establish that across all of the frames. And we get that information from the plans. On the plans, each mold station is marked where the shear line is. So we're working on mold 6. So mold 6 from the baseline is 8 inches. So we know that mold 6, the shear line is 8 inches off of the baseline. So the baseline is here. So if we go up, draw a line level from there. So now we know where the shear line is. So we will do this both sides of each mold and all of the molds. Those line up nicely. It seems like it fares out pretty good. I have all of the molds cut from 12 forward here on the port side. And one of the things that is important to remember when I'm cutting these notches is that it is the actual frame station in these forward molds is on the aft side. So that's where I want the back of the batten just even with that. All right, so now we'll work on the aft end on this batten. All right, that's, I have both rib bands that mark the shear line attached on both of the port and starboard sides. Now I permanently fasten those with some coarse drywall screws, coarse thread drywall screws. The coarse thread bites into the MDF better than a fine thread would. So these are permanently attached, and now with that we will use as the reference point of lining up the rest of the rib bands. And to do that, we need to line off the hull. Let's take a look at the model. So the term lining off means to determine the width of the planks as they lay on the hull. Now this is an important thing to figure out right now before we put the rib bands on, because we'd really ideally like the rib bands to fit right underneath each plank. It'll also make the appearance of the boat look a little better, and it won't be confusing if those lines don't line up with the planks. So ideally what we would like is that from the shear line, which is right here, that these broad strakes would appear to be the same width, especially down to the water line. Now that's going to be a little bit of a trick because the bilge, of course, is larger than at the stem and at the stern, where they will taper smaller on each end. So that's what we need to do now, is to sort of figure out where those rib bands are going to lay, and essentially that is where the planking will lay. I used a tailor's tape to measure frames 12 and 14, which are at the widest part of the boat. I ended up with the number of 44 inches from the shear line, and it was exactly the same on both. I then divided that by 9, which came up with 4 7/8. And I adjusted those numbers just a little bit so that I could have the garber plank and the beginning broad strake planks next to the garboard or on the bottom of the boat to be a little bit wider. I then marked out all of those spots on both of the frames that I could then start clamping some rib bands to. So I'm basically starting in the center here and clamping them. These should be okay temporarily on those two marks. And then I'm allowing these back ones to sort of fall where they need to, and I'm just trying to kind of evenly space them for now, and then I will adjust those later. Once I get the center set to where I wanted it, then I'll start adjusting the stern and the stem, and I'll just go through here and sort of try to get them spaced equally and so that they look good. Okay, and once I get those where I want them, then I'll go through and fair out the molds and put those notches in there the same way I did on the rib band for the shear. All right, last screw. So all of the rib bands have been faired and fastened to the frames. Well, in the next episode, we will be building a steam box and steaming some frames. So I hope to see you at the Wooden Boat Show in a couple of weeks. And if not, I'll see you the next episode. So as always, thanks for watching.